All right, you good to go.
All right. Okay, good morning, everyone. I'd like to call to order the open meeting for Tuesday, November 22nd, 2022, and ask the Commission Secretary for information on today's agenda.
Each commissioner has independently reviewed the minutes of the open meeting of Thursday, November 10th, 2022, and each has informed me there's no need to discuss the minutes.
Move we approve the minutes of Thursday, November 10th, 2022.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Each commissioner has independently reviewed the agenda, and each has informed me there's no need to discuss the notices associated with agenda items 2 through 4 or agenda item 9, accepting the uncontested alternatives identified in the final decision matrix in docket 6680 UR 123.
Move we approve the notices of investigation associated with agenda items 2 through 4.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
For agenda item 9, 6680 UR 123, I move that we approve the application of Wisconsin Power and Light Company for authority to adjust electric and natural gas rates.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, that brings us to agenda item 4. No, agenda item 5, which is docket 33W-115. This is an application of the City of Manitowoc that we actually discussed almost a year ago at our open meeting on December 9th of 2021. It regards their request to build infrastructure outside of the City of Manitowoc's corporate limits because of contamination that had come from an old facility. And so we had approved their ability to do so, but we had returned it back to the utility to make some changes to the tariff that they had originally presented to us. They did that, and I was okay with the changes that they made. I don't have any concerns over the information that they provided to us. So the revised draft tariff that they submitted to us, I would approve it as filed, and that's on page 7 of our memo. So I'm at alternative 1. Commissioner Nowak.
Yeah, I want to say I don't have concerns, but I still do have concerns about how this just plays out, and I've been struggling just trying. We're never going to find a perfect solution for this very odd situation. I feel for the people who live in the towns that have been receiving bottled water through some other means for years because of the contamination. But I also have a hard time with, making some people, I guess, gamble and wait to see if there's a positive test so they don't have to pay to have service hooked up. But based on my discussions, at first I was concerned they have to wait for the cadence of the testing that the DNR has and the city will be doing, which is not that frequent. But as long as it's not in the city's determination and a person can go to a third-party testing entity to check for the contaminants at the customer's own timing and cost, then they can then be hooked up at the city's expense to the water. So that's helpful. It's going to create an odd situation. I was a little, we didn't really hear from the towns that are impacted here. An odd patchwork of who's a city resident and who's not. Mm-hmm. It'll create some difficulties that I guess they are prepared apparently to address since they've executed an intergovernmental agreement. So, I was okay with it. I didn't know I was really racking my brain to see if there was other ways to come up with how to make this more equitable. And, I understand that it's unjust discrimination. again, it can't be perfect, but I just want the tariff to be clear that it's not based on the city's determinations. It's based on a third-party determinant of whether there's a detection in there. And I think it says that. I mean, I think I'm okay with that. I'm curious to hear Commissioner Hebner's thoughts on how to proceed. If this does go forward as is, I would like to get, I think that's important they report back, and I think we have that in there about customer complaints and costs, because it really can create an unfairness. They remove it seems like the biggest change they removed was the 5 years, the period where 5 years afterwards. I'm not sure if completely removing it was the best answer, but again, I don't know what that best answer is. So Commissioner Hebner,
Well, it sounds like you and I had the same struggles, Commissioner Nowak, because I actually went back, and it's my annual plug for Preferred Intelligence, and went back and reread, and
Yes.
and we
Yeah.
struggled with this when we first took it up. But to me, it is that question of, you know, if you're in a home in that area but you haven't had that positive test, do you pay the money to annex to get to the clean water now, or do you wait and, you know, see if you get a positive test, in which case then you would get connected for free,
and you
And
don't
that-
become a city resident.
and then you don't get annexed in either.
Yeah.
So I think that's and as you said, there was in the underlying docket description of this idea of 5 years, that, you know, one of the things I read related to that was that, you know, if there was a positive test, within 5 years after you had connected, then you'd basically be reimbursed. But my understanding too is that, well, once you connect, that private well is gonna be disconnected, and so it's you'll never know. So it's just an imperfect situation. So I highlighted the same things you did, Commissioner Nowak. Where did you land then?
You know, we don't have different alternatives before us, and that's just not a reason to approve something, but I also think that for now, this approach is going to be the best way forward. It's not that it might not change later. I just want the city and the utility to be very clear to the residents that the residents can test as often as they wish.
You're right.
And they should be able to hook up, because people move to towns for a reason. And they like that form of governance. And I don't like them being forced into a different municipality based on fear of unclean water.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think that for now, this is the best path forward, but I'm not sure that this is going to be a long-term solution, particularly if the plume grows. So I will reluctantly approve it.
Okay. I can join you guys. I mean, I think I have the same reluctance, you know, and the flip side of that is that my understanding is they've built these mains. They've
Yeah.
done the work, they've moved with urgency, and I think
Yeah.
that should be applauded to get the mains in place, and they're ready to connect customers, and I think that that's really positive. And approving it today gets us the ones that we know have tested positive moving forward.
Yeah.
And it maybe doesn't preclude from future rate cases or future, you know, amendments that the utility, the city, the towns may come to could address the concern that we've outlined today. So I can join you at all at one.
And you were fine
Okay,
with the...
then the next issue, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Then the next issue that we need to decide on are the reporting requirements as proposed by the utility. I was okay with the reporting requirements that they proposed, so I'm at alternative 1.
I agree with that.
Yep, I'm in the same spot.
Okay.
In docket 3320 CW 115, I move that we approve pursuant to our discussion today, the application of Manitowoc Water Public Utility to construct a water main extension outside of its service territory.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, the next agenda item is docket 4220-ER-102. This is Northern States Power Company's fuel cost plan. And my understanding is that while there's only one uncontested issue in our decision matrix, that one of our commissioners wanted to talk about an uncontested issue.
Yep, that was me. I'll confess. Chair, did you want to say anything more to tee up the docket, or should I just go ahead?
No, you can go ahead.
Okay. So as the chair described, this is the fuel cost plan for NSPW for next year. And as she said, there's only one item listed as uncontested here, and that I think is issue 3. As I looked at this, though, and I kind of brought this up when we did MG&E a couple weeks ago, is we've done these fuel cost plans, and I think things have been relatively stable for quite a long time, and now we've got volatility and we've got uncertainty. And for me, I think it just deserves a fresh look and a deeper look into, well, how is the risk and reward being shared between the utility and the customer? So, for example, in the testimony of Ms. Delva, she mentions, in addition to the fuel and purchase power costs produced by their model, there are other fuel and purchase power costs that do not affect the dispatch of generating resources. So they don't affect the dispatch of their generators, but they're added to the model cost output, such as gas pipeline reservation costs, gas storage costs, rail car lease costs, wind curtailment costs, and certain charges from MISO. And while I don't think we're going to necessarily solve any of those today, I just think going forward we should have maybe a second look at how the risk of fuel unavailability, fuel price volatility, how is this all just paid for by customers, or to what extent are some of these, paid for by the utilities? And there was a couple of items within the analysis that I felt too deserved changes. The first is related to the capacity sales, and this is the 8th item on the list of issue 1. What staff did and what the parties agreed to was that, as we know, the planning resource auction cleared at the high value of the cost of new entry for this planning year, which goes through May. Staff has then assumed that will go back to the $5 level for June through December. And this is a situation where NSPW is going to earn more money. If the higher the capacity value, the better it is for customers, because they're going to earn more money, and that's going to be a refund to customers. I felt like, to me, there was more of a 50-50 risk of, it's an imperfect system with this planning resource auction. It's either on and it's a high value, or it's off and it's very low. To me, it was more of we should be hedging our bets that it might be at Cone or it might be at $5. We've assumed $5 here, but I don't know that really much has changed in the broader MISO region that would tell us that that's going to go back to the way it was, and that this year was an outlier. I think a lot of the chatter is that this is going to continue to be a challenge, reliability in the upper Midwest. So I would adjust that, and I would basically assign a 50-50 risk, and what that would do is it would be $6.4 million in reduced fuel costs. The second item that I don't think we can address today, but I wanted to flag, is the way that the solar energy is being treated, and this is all in confidential, the numbers themselves, but there's a description in the testimony is basically the Wisconsin customers are paying the avoided retail cost for that solar energy. Well, when I think about solar energy and solar panels, one of the big values of them is as a price hedge, is that you build them, it's the steel in the ground, and then the sunlight itself is free, and you're hopefully avoiding the fuel volatility. But the way that this is being treated here, and why I think it deserves a second look, is that Wisconsin customers are paying that floating value of whatever the fuel price was during those hours. And so I didn't think that was necessarily right. I talked a lot with staff, Mike Ritzema, and I can see from past years that that number has moved around. So I don't think there's something in the record to change that, but I thought it was worth flagging that, I'm not sure that that's the way this should be treated, when it should be more of a fixed price, and then it's a value to the customers when prices go up, because we're hedged against that. So those are my comments. I think the only one that's actionable today is the question on the capacity value, and whether, you would agree to change that. Obviously, staff and the parties have not agreed to my perspective, but it wasn't necessarily raised in the docket either. So that's all I had on issue 1. Thanks.
So just to clarify, in addition to the one, you would add like 5 million or just under 5 million to the decrease in the adjustment under number 8.
Yeah, it would be, according to Mike, it would be about $6.4 million. So it would be a decrease in fuel costs.
Yeah.
Yep, of an additional $6.4 million.
Oh, an additional. Okay, that's what I was
Yeah.
asking.
Oh, yes, it would be additional.
6.4 in addition to the 1.6.
Yep.
Okay.
Well, actually, the 6.4 would be in addition to the 283. That would be the Wisconsin retail
Wisconsin
value,
one.
I
Okay.
think.
Okay.
I'm looking for Mike. Is that correct? Okay, thumbs up.
Got it.
So that would take that 283 to basically about 600 or 6.7 million roughly total. Okay.
Thoughts, Commissioner Nowak?
As we discussed a little bit last time with the MG&E one, I think this is a discussion that needs to take place over the next year when we're looking at, and I think the volatility is going to continue, and we've seen, because this is all about just setting a budget moving forward. Commissioner Huebner, you raised some interesting points, but I'm not sure that I have enough here in the record, and I would like to hear, too, the utilities' response to that moving forward. So I'm going to accept the proposed adjustment from staff that they have agreed to. And the other one you said you just raised. So I would leave it as is.
Okay.
And I agree with that. I'm going to leave it as is. I do think that setting the fuel cost plan is the appropriate place to do it, because that's where, like you indicated, we're setting the budget for it to be trued up. But I don't feel comfortable because I don't know what the response is. And so I think going forward, I think it would make a lot of sense to issue that as a data request when we're getting the fuel cost plans in, so that we can have the ability to look at it and the utility has a chance to respond to it. So I do think that the point is valid, but I don't have anything on the record right now that makes me comfortable agreeing to that adjustment.
Sounds good. Thank you both.
Sure. So I think the only contested issue is issue 3, and that is, should the applicant be required to estimate the impact on monitored fuel costs of compliance with Casper, which is the cross-state air pollution rule. We talked about this last week, and this is a little different situation because in this particular, so last week when we talked about it, there was a value that was in the record. And for this particular case, there's nothing in the record that we can use to make that calculation. And so my understanding from staff is that it would be okay to leave this as is, and it would likely be addressed within that 2% band of the fuel rules. So in this particular case, I'm okay leaving this as is, and I would not require the applicant to provide that estimate. So I'm at alternative 2.
Yeah, I agree with this. This wasn't even addressed in the plan. It was just raised by the ALJ during the hearing. So I don't support putting an estimate in there now, since it doesn't appear that either side was prepared to do so or deal with. And this is, they address it differently with their interchange agreement anyway with their parent.
Yeah, I'll join you guys at alt 2.
Commissioner Huebner?
Yeah, I'll join you guys at alt 2. You know, this was it was interesting, and I think, that ALJ saw this maybe in one hearing and was like, well, wait a minute. And I thought it was good he brought it up, but as you said, we don't have a number here, and so I'll join you at alt 2. That's fine.
Okay, I'll move then in docket 4220 ER 102 that we approve the proposed fuel plan from Northern States Power Company, Wisconsin, pursuant to our discussion today.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, the next item on our agenda is docket 5820-UR-116. This is the application of Superior Water, Light, and Power Company for authority to adjust retail electric, gas, and water rates. Issue 6 is the first issue for us to address. I can't remember. Does somebody want to discuss any uncontested alternatives before issue 6?
I don't have any need to discuss uncontesteds in this docket at all.
I think it's in the power,
Okay.
power and light one.
Correct.
It's the next one?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So we move to issue 6, which is the issue of credit card escrow accounting treatment. We had authorized escrow accounting for any over or under collection of credit card fees, and the applicant anticipates that customers will continue to want to use electronic payments, and so they have asked the ability to discontinue escrow accounting treatment and just require a true up in a future proceeding, and I was okay with that, so I'm at alt 1.
Yeah, I'm fine with that as well.
Okay. All right, I can join you there.
Issue 7, what inflation rate should be used for revenue requirement purposes? So this is interesting, and I think we're going to start to see this with more frequency. The applicant filed back in April. At the end of April, they used a 2.35% general inflation rate, and then subsequently in rebuttal testimony, they requested to update that inflation rate to 5.20 for the 2023 test year. And I understand, I think we all understand, because we're not living under a rock, that inflation is real, and that it's rising quickly. But so are other inputs. And when I looked at that, when I looked at this request, my first question was, did we receive the same request when inflation was headed in the opposite direction? And the answer is no. And so I think that there are a lot of inputs to rate cases. There are a lot of data points that go in, and we have to have pencils down at a certain point in time. And so for this one, I just wasn't persuaded that that value should be updated. And so I was at alternative 1. I would use the inflation rate as of the filing date.
Yeah, I agree with that. As you said, there's a lot of data points that are not static when they go into the filing. And while we are all impacted by inflation, and this does make a difference for the company, it makes a difference as well for the customers. And we will see it in other cases, but here, I thought it was interesting, the CUB took no position on it. But I agree. We've had a similar type of request for something like this many years ago, and you have to start to ask, where do we put those pencils down? And I think this is one where we can't start to, there wasn't enough, other than it's changed dramatically, I don't know what else, there's not any other persuasive evidence to make it, to change it now.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll join you guys at Alt 1. I had written down that I would either support Alt 1, or the only other number I would support is the 2023 number, right? I mean, yes, inflation has risen in 2022, but we're setting rates for next year. So the 2023 number from staff was I think it was Justin's exhibits, was 3.2%. So, but I'm going to join you guys at Alt 1, which is the 2.35%. So.
Okay.
Okay.
The next issue is issue 12, which is the ROE. So the applicant has requested an ROE of 10.4%. That's the same as their currently authorized ROE. Commission staff presented a series of financial models, and they came up with a range between 8.38 and 9.81%. They recommended a 10% return on equity in the spirit of gradualism. There was testimony back and forth about the size of the utility. My understanding is, while this particular subsidiary is small as compared to the other utilities within the state of Wisconsin, they also have a large parent company, and they're typically borrowing from that parent company. We'll talk a little bit about that in our next issue. But where I landed was 10%, so at alternative 1. But I could also be persuaded to set it at 10.2%. That was sort of the middle ground. Again, sort of spurred on the theory of gradualism. But right now I'm at Alt 1. I would set it at 10%. Commissioner Nowak?
Yeah, this is, well, they do have a large parent. You still have to look at the entity itself, and they are very unique. It is extremely hard to find a proxy group for them, given that they basically have a very few customers that make up the large percentage of their revenues. So there's a lot of risk with that. And I think, finding that peer group was difficult. Also the fact that they're really a distribution-only facility, utility. And when we look at it, 10.4, that's a lot higher than where our other utilities at. And that was set, obviously, because of those reasons I just stated. So, but I also, I thought staff's testimony was, they tried to get into that as close as an approximation as possible. I do think it needs to move downwards, but I was landing at the 10.2 just in the gradualism. I think a 40 basis point reduction. I think it's very important that we recognize that there has to be a directional change, but at least given the current circumstances, but it must be done gradually. So I think a 20 basis point reduction is adequate here, and that's where I landed.
Okay. Commissioner Huebner?
Yeah, I landed at alternative 1, and I think the staff of 10% and the fact that Cub was at 10% was important for me. My druthers would put this at 9.8%, but I'm going to join you at Alt 1, Chairperson. But just looking at the range that staff did of 8.3 to 9.8, knowing that we're going to go down, but we're still not even in the range of what our staff model is saying. To me, that says, that the midpoint of that is 9.1%. So sometimes we talk about, we know, we want to move directionally to a spot, and we kind of game out, well, how many jumps would it take to get somewhere? I don't know that we're necessarily shooting for that midpoint, but just seeing that, even a move to 10 wouldn't get us in the range, to me, was influential. So that's why I landed at Alt 1.
Okay. All right. I will stay at alternative 1. Then we move on to issue 13, which is what is a reasonable interest rate for the applicant's short-term borrowing through commercial paper. Now, this one, when they filed, they used 1%. In rebuttal, they asked to revise it to 3.63%. My understanding is that this one seemed to be an error, that it was an oversight on the part of the applicant. And so I was comfortable allowing them to revise that short-term borrowing rate to 3.63%, which is alternative 2. Commissioner Nowak?
Yeah, I had the same understanding as you. This is not, this is different than the inflation question request. The 1% was a placeholder, and it was something realized later that it wasn't updated. So I will join you at alternative 2.
Okay, Commissioner Huebner?
Yep, I'm at alternative 2 as well, and I think this, kind of like what I talked with inflation, is, 2022 is over for these rates, so we're looking at the actual cost, the actual inflation rate of 2023. We know that that is going to be 3.63%, so I think that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. All right, issue 15 is what is the appropriate cost of service study? We typically consider the results of multiple cost of service studies, and then we typically do not rely on a specific cost of service. And so in keeping with that, I am at alternative 4. Commissioner Nowak.
I agree.
I'm in the same spot.
Commissioner Huber. Okay. All right. Issue 16 is electric revenue allocation. Both the applicant and commission staff provided testimony. Commission staff proposed an electric revenue allocation at their proposed revenue requirement. And so I would accept staff's proposed revenue allocation, which is alternative 3. Commissioner Nowak.
Yeah, I thought that the allocation proposed, if you use the ratios, even though it's a different revenue number now based on the ROE, that the utility and Enbridge had supported, made more sense. I think that the staff one, I thought smoothed some out a little more than it made overcorrection. So I was at alternative 3. If you look at, we had a pretty wide range on those cost of service studies. But particularly with the EP5, holding that rate closest to something around 1, I thought the Enbridge requirement hit that mark better.
So you're at alt 2.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. All right. You're at alt 2. Commissioner Huebner.
Sorry.
Sorry, Commissioner Nowak, are you at Alt 1 or Alt 2? I'm sorry. Because at some point in the testimony,
Well, they agreed.
they started agreeing, yep.
Yeah. No,
And then in their positions here, they're both at Alt 1.
yeah, no, so it's all, it was,
So you're at.
yeah, 1.
You're at 1,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's what
Okay. All right. I think you initially said 3, unless I just can't
I
hear.
was looking at my third row.
Just entirely
gosh.
possible.
No, I don't follow the alternative numbers. So,
Got it.
Commissioner Nowak, was it your understanding that, and sorry to put you on the spot with this, but Kavita raised some allocation issues in her testimony that the Enbridge and SWLP, agreement, that it resolves those allocator,
it was my understanding that,
or did they all end up, did the staff one resolve that too?
I didn't think the staff one resolved it.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, and these are really close where they landed. So I was talking to Tanner right before this on this very question. So I'm a little in the middle. So I'm gonna just reserve this and take a quick break after
Okay.
when we get to the end on 16 and 17. Knowing you're in different spots. Okay. So
Okay.
I'll put a pin in 16 and 17.
So for issue, okay, so you're gonna want to come back to 17 as well?
Yeah, well,
They're linked.
yes, because I think they're kind of linked. We've got to pick
Yep.
one. Okay.
Okay. All right. So for 17, I'm at alt 2, consistent with accepting staff revenue allocation.
Okay.
Commissioner Nowak?
Were you still at alt 1?
Yeah, well, yes.
Okay, great.
Yep.
I'll get back to you on that. Okay, thanks.
Okay. Then the next issue is 17A, which is the appropriate fixed customer charges. Commission staff was in the same spot as the applicant, so I'm at alternative 1.
I agree.
Commissioner Nowak?
Yep, I agree.
Okay. And I
Commissioner
had a quick hybrid on this, which is the top two listed in our table there. Staff had the applicant do the basic customer cost, and on ER1 and ERTD, it came in at $9 or under $9. So for those two, I would stick with the $9, and for everything else, I would accept it. So I would be at alt 2, but I know you guys are at alt 1, so.
Okay. 17B, is it reasonable for the applicant to propose an interruptible rate as proposed by Enbridge? The applicant has agreed to do this, and so I would be at alt 1, where I would require them to file that rate as proposed by Enbridge. Commissioner Nowak.
Yeah, I'm never the biggest fan of putting these things in order points, but it was raised here, and they did agree to it, so I'll be fine with that, alternative 1.
Okay. I'll join you guys there. I had alt 3, take no position, written on mine. If they've agreed to do it, great. I'm not sure we need to order them, but it sounds like it's going to happen, so I'm fine. Okay.
Okay. Issue 18, what's the appropriate natural gas cost of service? I'm at alt 2, do not adopt a specific cost of service model. Commissioner Nowak.
I agree.
I agree.
Okay. Issue 19 is natural gas revenue allocation. Looks like everybody's in agreement that alt 2 is reasonable, so I'm at alt 2 as well.
I agree.
Okay.
Yep, I agree.
All right. Issue 20 is the same thing. Natural gas rate design. Everyone agrees that alt 2 is reasonable, so I'm at alt 2 as well.
I am as well.
Yep, alt 2.
Okay. 20A is natural gas fixed customer charges. Similar to the electric side, commission staff proposed the same as those proposed by the applicant. So I'm at alt 1. I would accept them as proposed. Commissioner Nowak.
Yes, I agree.
Yep, I agree with that
Commissioner
one.
Huebner.
Yep, alt 1.
Okay. All right. Issue 20B, should the coal displacement rate be canceled? No customers are on this rate, and so I'm okay accepting their proposal to eliminate it. Alt 1. Commissioner Nowak.
I agree.
Yep, I agree.
Commissioner Huebner. And then the water, there are no contested issues in the water cases. So, Commissioner Huebner, you want to take a
maybe
five-minute break
5 minutes,
to talk
yep.
about 16 and 17?
Yep, thank you.
Okay. Okay.
Thumbs up, we're ready to go.
All right, we're back. Commissioner Hebner, issue 16.
Yep, so on 16 and 17, I'm going to end up at alternative 1. I thought the back and forth between Enbridge and the utility, resolve some of those revenue allocation issues that, I guess I just sided with them and thought, yeah, it makes sense to adjust those. And my understanding is that their combined accepted revenue allocation does account for those. And so I'm going to join, or I'm going to be at alternative 1 for issue 16 and then flow through the rate design piece on 17 with the same at alt 1.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. I will stay where I was,
Great.
but I think that wraps us up for this docket.
It does.
Okay. I'll move then in docket 5820 UR 116 that we approve the application of Superior Water, Light and Power Company to adjust electric, gas, and water rates pursuant to our discussion today.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. We'll move to docket number 6680-ER-103. This is the request of Wisconsin Power and Light for approval of its 2023 fuel cost plan. This one has a couple of novel issues that I'm anxious to hear both of your thoughts on. The first one is issue 1, which is, should the results of the economic dispatch model used be adjusted? So as is typical, the applicant ran their model and they came up with values for their fuel cost plan. And when they looked at the results of the model, they recognized that the model results showed their cost per megawatt hour to be unreasonably low when they went back and compared to actual monitored costs of prior years. So they proposed 2 alternatives. The model shows a cost of $15.85 a megawatt hour. They proposed 2 alternatives. They proposed a cost of $19.81 a megawatt hour, and they proposed a cost of $22.36 a megawatt hour. Commission staff then proposed an alternative to that, and what they did is they went back and they looked at the generation output that was being modeled to come from Edge 5. And Commission staff proposed to limit that amount of generation, and that resulted in fuel costs that were roughly between the applicants' two proposed fuel cost levels. And so there was a lot of talk back and forth about, first of all, is it appropriate to make adjustments? If it is appropriate to make adjustments, what should those adjustments look like? What should they be based on? Should we be adjusting the inputs to the model instead of making adjustments after the fact? And so this for me was a lot of discussion we had in our briefing, and I went and I looked and reread and sort of I came to the conclusion that I don't necessarily think it's a good idea to hold firm to a model's results if when you look at the results of that model and you compare it to what's actually happened, there's a discrepancy. So I think that we are, and we've talked a lot about this in all of the other fuel cost plans. I think that, yes, we're setting a budget and ultimately it gets trued up. And so we do get to what's actual. But I do think that what we do when setting the fuel cost plans, and I think the applicant and I think CUB and Commission staff all agree that we should be trying to approximate reality. And if the model spits out a ridiculous value, then I think it's incumbent upon all of us to take a hard look at that value and figure out whether and how it should be adjusted. I also think that as utilities generation portfolios change and they look at different types of units retiring, coming online, and how they're dispatched, I don't know that there is a model that really reflects the real world right now without making adjustments. So I don't have a concern, and I don't find it particularly controversial to make adjustments when those adjustments are based on actual data points. And so I would agree with the applicant's proposal. I would reflect their proposed limit on the excess generation of 17% for each month of 2023. So that puts me at alternative 2 under issue 1. Commissioner Nowak.
Yeah, this one was certainly interesting, and I have lots of charts that I drew to figure out the bouncing numbers because there were multiple proposals, as you indicated, but then the proposals changed fairly dramatically after the latest NYMEX updates as well. And so just to get a better understanding of where it's all headed. And to your point on making adjustments, utilities make adjustments to inputs. So it's not that adjustments are unheard of. This was just as it came out, it looked very different than what's happened in the past. And I think it was a proper thing to sit back and look and say, what's going on here? Did we put something in wrong, or what's different in the market? So what is happening? And I think it was the right thing to do, to sit back and say, what's different here? And I don't disagree with making an adjustment. And then it was a question of, well, which one, right? And so the utility proposed more of on their portfolio of all their units, a 17% cap, which represents the maximum that they've reached. Whereas the staff proposal came in and said, well, let's just adjust it based on Edge 5, because that's what also made a dramatic shift here with the excess generation. So let's kind of isolate that one and make an adjustment based on that just particular unit. And so I went back and forth on, what is the better methodology? And, we won't know until sometime next year or the year after when they do the reconciliation anyway. Because right now we're just trying to figure out, are we putting that number into rates for fuel that we think they're going to hit next year? So we're going to try to avoid a big swing in an under collection or an over collection, because we're already looking at a $100 million surcharge from 2021 that we're working into rates here. So where I landed is the same spot as you, because I think that when you I think you have to look at the system as a whole when you're making the adjustment, rather than, because the fuel costs are, we put the fuel costs for the whole system rather than just one unit. And so making an adjustment based across the portfolio, I think made more sense to me. But where's that lands us now, that is alternative 2, but then based on the latest, and then they also made an adjustment for the Riverside sale, the 25 megawatts. But with the NYMEX update, we're looking at $364 million, let's call it $365 million fuel expense that we're going to plan for next year. Where last year's was 309. And then, as I mentioned, where there's $100 million, this is not an easy pill to swallow, because when you look at the last 2 years for this utility's customers, both in base rates and in fuel, for what we've approved, with the base rates, or what we'll walk through, and fuel from last year and base rates. Combined over the 2 years, we're looking at about a 22, just shy of a 22% increase over a 2-year period for customers. So, that is the reality of where things are at today for a whole variety of reasons. It's policies at the federal level. There's policies that are pushing more generation. It's the catch-up of putting generation into rates that we've approved, and it's the volatility of the gas prices too. But it is a significant number that we're seeing from this, and and the other thing that I learned, it's not going to end soon. As we talked about, this volatility is going to continue just based on the updates right now from our staff, where the utility is at with its projections for 2022. If we had to do it today, there was going to be a significant surcharge next year as well. So, and this maybe just perhaps then leads back to your point you brought up, I think, when we started this meeting, is we maybe need to take a look at what is going on here, because it is difficult to set a budget with so many moving parts, and we really try with the best information available to us. But between base rates and fuel, 22% over 2 years is that stands out.
Mm-hmm.
So, long way of saying I'm at alternative 2.
Yeah, and I'm at alt 4.
All right.
I'm at alt 4, and the reason I'm at alt 4 is exactly what I said at the start of this meeting and exactly what I said 2 weeks ago is I just continue to oppose the idea that we're going to pass all the costs of this utility and other utilities not being able to get fuel to their power plants, and we're just going to say, oh, the customers we got to pay for the power plant and pay for the fact that we can't get coal to it to sell into the market. And I don't think that that's appropriate. I think setting a lower budget incentivizes them to solve the problem and figure something out. The customers have no capability to solve the issues that were outlined in this docket, and the applicant, while they may have, it's not all in their control, I understand that, but they have more control. They have more capability than the customers. And I worry that setting the budget, essentially, I know there's true up, I know we're going to do prudency review, I get all that. If you set the budget lower, then you get the opportunity to do more prudency review. If you set the budget high and they don't meet it, we just say, oh, it came in under. We don't get to look at, well, maybe it came in 20 million under, but if we did prudency review, maybe it was supposed to be 40 million under. We really lose that, and that's where I don't think we should do that. So I'm at alt 4. And alt 4 would be a 300 and...
I understand that there's a desire to discuss uncontested alternatives. That is not me. So if anybody has uncontested that they want to talk about, 2 and 3 and 4 are all uncontested.
Yep, I have said my piece on the uncontested. It kind of applies to 6, the coal. But my point has been made, so I'm good on the uncontesteds from here on out. Thanks.
All right. Okay. All right. Thank you. So then the only decision remaining is issue 5, and that is another novel issue, and that is what is the appropriate monitored fuel window for this proceeding. So there was a suggestion made that perhaps we could consider an asymmetrical window where we would allow for plus 2% on the surcharge and a minus of 0.5% for a refund. And we did this back in 2005 during a hurricane season that was causing a lot of volatility. And there was some back and forth about whether or not the current fuel rules allow for that asymmetry, or whether those fuel rules have to be symmetrical in setting a single percentage. I read the fuel rules. I went back and looked at the legislative authority around the fuel rules. And I think that in my view of the fuel rules, we need to set it at a symmetrical window. And for this, I think that the symmetrical window of plus or minus 2% is reasonable. So I'm at alternative 2. Commissioner Nowak.
Yeah, I agree. As I mentioned a week or two ago, whenever we addressed the fuel window, I'm not a big fan of changing the 2%. And I also think if there is compelling reason to change it, it should be, and I think there's an argument it must be symmetrical. So I would leave it at 2%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As you said, Chair, I think staff provided that legislative history that was, it says symmetrical in the legislation. It didn't quite make it into the rules. But it is supposed to be symmetrical. So I'm open to different than 2% if the arguments are made, but for this case, I'm at alt 2. Before we close up, I did want to credit Mike Ritzema on this because he did a great job. And in particular, at the levels that were approved today, he did identify about $25.5 million of savings in the process related to coal conservation. So we should give a credit to Mike, and no problems with the creativity on this one either, Mike. Going back to history to see, but as was mentioned, the legislation changed, the fuel rules have changed since that 2005 season as well. So thank you.
That's a great point, Commissioner Huebner. I agree. Kudos to Mike.
Yep.
Okay. All right. That concludes our official business for today. The next open meeting is scheduled for Thursday, December 1st,
I think we need a
2022.
motion.
Whoop.
I'm gonna make a motion first to approve it.
What?
We have
Oh,
to-
yeah, sorry.
That's okay. In docket 6680 ER 103, I move that we approve the application of Wisconsin Power and Light Company for their fuel plan.
And I'm going to dissent.
Okay.
Okay, I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed?
No.
Okay. Now our official business has concluded. The next open meeting is scheduled for Thursday, December 1st, 2022 at 10:30 a.m. May we have a motion to adjourn?
I move we stand adjourned until Thursday, December 1st.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.